My man.
Hello, Corey.
How are you, brother?
I'm all right. Welcome to the Pilote podcast with Corey Smith and David Fuller. This week, we whitter about Twitter. Twitter, which has been in the news this week for some reason. Some bloke bought it. So talk to me about Twitter, Corey.
I knew you were going to bait me into this conversation today, and I've been waiting all week. We talked about this when this kind of news story started, and I think we both agreed that Elon Musk potentially buying Twitter wasn't necessarily a good idea, but I've kind of flip-flopped on this.
It's complicated, and unlike social media, there is nuance.
There is nuance to it. Let me tell you how I've changed my mind about it. So I started thinking about what does it mean with Elon Musk owning Twitter now, potentially. I started thinking about, we've had some conversations, not on the podcast, previous to having the podcast, about just us taking stock in our contributions to the downfall of the Great Society and our contributions to building things like social media and, over the years. Social media, when it started, I think we all agree was a great idea. We thought altruistically, here's the thing we're going to build, and it's going to bring people together and allow you to stay in touch with family and friends that you don't really talk to that much. And
even if we go back before social media, that was the promise of the internet, right? Back when the Well and all these San Francisco hippie kind of internet things were around, that was the promise of the internet. Yeah.
Right. So I think that we all had everybody's had largely the best intentions about the internet and social media. And then, the social media has become what it's become. It's kind of like a cesspool of bullying and censorship and selling your data and, the business model of social media. And, kind of everything about it is kind of the antithesis of what I think we really kind of hoped and dreamed that it would be. Right. And I feel like social media as a business is caught in a doom loop. Like, we can't break free of what it's become because we can't see the forest for the trees. It's like it's become this kind of snowball effect of we figured out how to monetize it and what makes it tick, right? So there's this doom loop of what drives the monetization of social media is eyeballs, right? People reading the content. Well, what draws the eye, and that's how we monetize it, right? So the more eyeballs, the more advertising, the more paid content there is. That's what drives the money to it. And how do we drive eyeballs? Well, it's got to be more sensationalized content, right? And what moves stuff up is controversial content.
So I have a question, just as you're talking.
Sure.
When did it change from being social networks, which has a different utility, to social media?
Good question. I don't know. Man, I had to think about that. I don't know when it really switched. Probably the middle of the 2000s.
And maybe it's different platforms have different utility. To me, Facebook was a social network, like Friends Reunited, or
right.
There have been others which basically allow, and LinkedIn, I guess, from a professional point of view, that allow you to stay in touch with people, and that's its main utility, which is to keep in touch. And then there's a second one, which is once people on social networks start creating content, user-generated content became a thing where, you take a photo with your iPhone or your smartphone and you post it online, and other people can, watch that video, and that can be innocuous, like a kitten or a quokka, or it can be a cop kicking the crap out of a black person on an American street. To me, there seems to be a distinction which has been lost between a social network and social media. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right. Instagram was founded around 2010. Do you think that was kind of when the shift began from a networking to
I think
more
the
of
shift
a,
was smartphones.
yeah,
I think the shift was smartphones. So as soon as everybody's got
2007, 8, maybe.
as soon as everyone has a camera, a high-res camera, and anyone can upload video onto a global platform for free, and that can be shared instantaneously, then that is, I think, the birth of social media. That's when the media element of it takes over from the network element of it. Because suddenly journalists are starting to say, oh, I just saw this thing which was posted by a random individual in a country where we don't have a film crew, and we can put that on the news in HD, and that changes the dynamic. And I think that also changes the business model slightly. But we'll get onto that because I think that's important for Twitter. A lot of people are sort of talking about the fact that Twitter doesn't really have a business model. It's failed to make money.
All of this has kind of morphed what I think the intent of social networking or social media was intended to be into what it has become today. And it's kind of gotten stuck in this kind of cycle, this doom loop of like bullying and data privacy and the business model of social media. And it's like, I feel like there's a general attitude towards social media where it's like, we're kind of addicted to it, but nobody really even likes using it anymore. Do you know what I mean? Do you ever get that sense where it's like, we're still
and I've said this before, I think it's platform specific, but maybe I'm different. Instagram gives me joy for the most part.
Me too.
Twitter brings me rage, and Facebook is somewhere in between, and Instagram and LinkedIn is from a professional point of view, you've got a different function. I got into Snapchat, but I couldn't work it out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I understand.
I stopped using Snapchat just because I didn't really get it. I've never got into TikTok, but I can see why people do.
Oh,
and I think TikTok is more on the Instagram side of things. It's more about just people having a bit of fun, and for the most part, I see TikTok as a positive force rather than a negative force.
Right.
I see Instagram as a positive force rather than a negative force. I see Facebook, I can see it has massive negative downsides for certain types of people, depending on how you use it. And for the most part, I see Twitter as a negative force.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I took a step back because, you hear, of course, with all of the media coverage surrounding this Elon Musk Twitter thing, both sides here in America, at least anyway, of like it's going to be great. Elon Musk is going to buy Twitter and it's going to become a bastion of free speech and blah, blah, blah. And then you hear the other side of it is like, all they're going to do is they're going to let Donald Trump back on, and it's going to be, all of this bad content and all this hate speech is going to come back to Twitter, and it's going to be worse. So I started to think about that. And, Elon Musk has been pretty vocal about being whatever the term he used of free speech, right? And it's like, what does that really mean? So what if Donald Trump does come back to Twitter as an example? What does that really mean? Because the other piece of it that gets kind of lost in the shuffle of, the misquoted things that Elon Musk says is that let Donald Trump and anybody else come back to Twitter and not do these bans of like Twitter and the New York Post and many other people from different walks of life. He's also saying, let's ban the bots, right? Let's get rid of bots, which is, I think, much more dangerous than a single person like Donald Trump. So if you take away the bots, like how much of a voice does a single person like Donald Trump have, and how much influence does he have? What if it is just altruistically, if we open the platform up to everybody and you got rid of the bots and it just was a level playing field and it was a truly free speech open platform? What if Elon Musk does some of the things that he says he wants to do? And what are some of the things that he hasn't yet said he wants to do? And I kind of went down that rabbit hole, and I started to kind of look at it through the lens of, here's Elon Musk, this guy who came from helping get Hotmail started and sold, did PayPal and sold, like thinking about where he came from. And then, he had this crazy idea for Tesla and everybody said he was crazy and he made that work. And then SpaceX, like clearly this guy's got a vision. He didn't get into Twitter on a lark. He's got something in mind for Twitter.
Yeah,
and
considering the amount of money that he's bet, and he has bet it. He's bet
he's
Tesla,
got a vision.
He's bet his Tesla stock, and he's bet a whole bunch of other things. So this is a big play.
And we may not know what his vision is, but he's got some vision in mind. So let's take a step back for a minute and think about what could the vision be, and is it necessarily bad? Because the fact of the matter is, social media, social networking has not evolved in a decade. It's stuck.
Nearly 2 decades.
2 decades, right? And we're moving towards Web3. We're moving towards the metaverse. Meta's answer to evolving social media is, well, we know what that is. It's to just take Facebook and put it on the metaverse, or make it the metaverse, right?
Yeah.
Maybe Elon Musk's vision for Twitter is exactly the medicine that social networking needs to kick it in the butt and evolve it, and to actually evolve it or move it forward. Why don't we just wait and see what he's got in mind for this before we criticize it?
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this a lot and sort of questioning my original reactions and assumptions as well. So there's a lot of nuance, but there's also a lot of things that just aren't being talked about. And the reason they're not being talked about is because Twitter is, for want of a better word, an elitist platform.
Yeah.
Elon Musk's got 80-something million followers. And some of the big people on Twitter have got millions and millions of people who follow him, but they're not normal. How many Twitter followers do you have? I know you had a new account recently, so maybe that's not a fair question. But
yeah, it's not a fair question. I think previous to that, I'll have to go look. Hold on a second. I had about 3,500. Not many.
Right. So I've got 2,000, about 2,000. And I've had about 2,000 for about 10 years.
Right.
They're not the same 2,000. So some of those people have come along, are new, and some of those people have dropped off as I've changed countries, I've changed jobs and changed industries, and therefore I have gained followers and lost followers along the way. But I've got about 2,000. But that's almost 3 times what most people have. The average is 700. The average is 700. And that means there's a whole bunch of people who've got none. And that means there's a whole bunch of people who've got tens of millions. A lot of people have been talking about, what this means for the people who allegedly have been cancelled and people who've been censored and whatever else. But I don't really know what this means for the average user. I think this means absolutely nothing for the average Twitter user. I went through my follower list this week and had a look at a whole bunch of people who I follow and who follow me. And a large number, a majority of the people who follow me haven't tweeted since the beginning of the pandemic, started.
Yeah.
Early 2020, there seems to have been a massive drop-off of people using Twitter. There's a whole bunch of people who I follow and who follow me who haven't done anything on Twitter for 2 years. I started using Twitter in 2008. In 2008, it was a private company, and no one cared that it was a private company in 2008. That was before it went public. Each week, we get sidetracked and go off on tangents as we discuss the main topic. This material gets edited out of the podcast, but we keep recording. And the outtakes? Well, some of them can be found on our YouTube channel. Subscribe and get notifications about the latest bonus content. And now back to our main subject. I've got a lot of thoughts, but the one thing I was thinking of today was just pure marketing. Musk has got 80 million followers. If he was doing PPC, Google ads, and every single one of his followers, he was paying $1 a click for every time one of his followers clicked an ad, that's costing him $80 million a click.
Right.
The number I saw today was that Twitter has about half a billion, 500 million users, which is nothing.
Right.
500 million users, half of which are probably bots. I've got 5 accounts at least. One for me, one for a bunch of blogs that I've had in the past over the last few years, whatever else. The biggest one I ever had was, I think, my yacht sponsorship blog had about 8,000 users. Let's be generous and say that of the 500 million users on Twitter, half of them are bots. That's 250 million users. If you divide 44 billion by 250 million,
can you imagine?
That's cheap. Let's say the average revenue, whatever he does next, let's say he turns on payments, or he turns it into a super app, or he turns on advertising, or whatever he does to monetize the platform. Even if you're being super, super critical and saying only 25% of those users are active, if the lifetime value of each one of those users is $100, everyone's looking at the share price and saying, oh, well, the share price is, this is a great deal compared to the share price, and it's 44 times EBITDA.
But that's not the math by which Wall Street
doesn't matter. It might not be the math that Wall Street's using, but if he's looking at it as a marketing person.
How difficult do you think it is going to be for Elon Musk and his team to improve Twitter and to increase the user base over the next?
He doesn't have to increase the user base.
I know, but I'm just saying.
All he has to do is increase the revenue per user.
Right.
So let's assume that Musk says, I'm never going to get a new Twitter user onto the platform, and half of them are bots anyway. He's still got 250 million users. At the moment, of those 250 million users, you're getting no revenue. And instead, you get $1 from each one of those users per year. That's significant. So you don't have to grow the user base. All you have to do is make those users more profitable. And if he's in a super app kind of mind, if you're looking around the world and looking at WhatsApp or WeChat or other platforms, and you say, okay, you could make Twitter a messaging platform pretty easily. There's already direct messaging within Twitter.
Interesting. So
so you can add payments into that.
That's where his head's at?
Peer-to-peer payments. He's from PayPal.
He's from PayPal. That's right. That's true.
Peer-to-peer payments within Twitter. So I can send you money via Twitter, and Twitter gets a cent through it for every single transaction that I send you through Twitter, or I pay for my T-shirt on my e-commerce website via Twitter instead of using PayPal. This is 500 million users. A cent here, $1 here. You can turn Twitter into a super app pretty quickly, I would imagine, as a product, being the product guy that he is.
That's a super interesting perspective. So are you thinking that this may be his intent, his direction?
That's what I would do.
Really interesting. Very, very intuitive. I hadn't even considered that.
But
well, you've really opened up an interesting conversation here. So do you think it's more likely that this is a question? Do you think it's more likely that Elon Musk will take Twitter in a completely new direction, or that there's a possibility that he will evolve Twitter and evolve social networking / social media in a new way that will shift the paradigm? What are your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts are that someone with 80 million followers who's the richest man in the world can't possibly understand how an average Twitter user thinks.
Fair.
It's become this place for people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk and various journalists and politicians.
So you think it's more likely that it's going to be the former and not the latter?
I haven't, like I said, I think it's complicated. He's obviously got something in mind, because otherwise he wouldn't have leveraged his Tesla shares for a margin call on such a massive bet. But I think as a platform, Twitter is a really interesting platform, and always kind of has been different in the sense that Twitter was sort of different, is that they left a bat and ball on the side of a field and let the users work out what to do with it. They didn't say, we're going to play baseball and here are the rules. They said, here's a bat and ball, you work it out. And things like hashtags and various other, quirks of Twitter came about because of the restrictions that it had. So it had a 140 character limit. So hashtags became invented by users as a way of sorting things and filtering things because Twitter hadn't actually built that into the product. It's a platform in that sense, which doesn't really have as many rules and regulations as some of the other social platforms has. They increased their tweet limit from 140 to 280 characters. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The 140 character limit forced people to think more about their tweets, to be more succinct. But on the other hand, it's very difficult to make a coherent argument with nuance and 50 shades of grey in 140 characters. It tends towards sensationalism and writing headlines that are clickbait. There's some other things which I like about it. Like I like lists. I don't know whether anyone uses lists on Twitter, but I do. I have a sailing list, I have a professional list, I have a Web3 list. I can look at different types of feed rather than just a single feed. I think that's a really cool thing. I really wish LinkedIn would do that. I really wish LinkedIn would allow me to say, right, just show me my e-commerce feed. While we're on the product, he's talked about things like edit buttons. I have two minds about that. What do you think about the edit button?
I personally would like the edit button. Wouldn't you?
I want a restricted edit button.
Restricted how?
I want it to exist for like 10 minutes. So if I make a spelling mistake, I can go back and correct it. But I don't believe that someone who's told a lie and got caught out in it should be able to go back 10 days later and edit their tweet.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm notoriously fat-fingered. So if I type something and post it, if I'm like, oh shit, I want to go back and change that. Like I'd like to be able to change it, but like after 10, 15 minutes I'd be fine with that. 100%. I don't think you should be able to go back and change a post that you posted a week ago.
And I think that's one of the advantages of Twitter in the past has been the fact that you can't edit it. That's kind of Web3 blockchain kind of stuff. If every tweet was being locked into the blockchain as you wrote it, maybe that would change people's behavior. If they knew that it was being saved forever in an immutable form. Being Elon, he understands blockchain and he understands some of these things. So he's talking about freedom of speech. It's become one of those cliches. It's become one of those catch cries that, freedom of speech. But freedom of speech is a really complicated subject. It's a bit of a distraction. Outside of the US, the US has the First Amendment. Right, you probably understand the U.S. Constitution better than I do. Maybe, but
maybe not.
It's something that doesn't necessarily exist outside of the U.S. This enshrined right to be able to say certain things, but there's also competing laws. People forget about libel and defamation. Yeah, you can have free speech. You can say whatever you want about me, but if you defame me, I'm going to take you to court and sue you.
Right.
And there's a lot of politicians who've made a lot of money out of taking newspapers to court for libel and defamation. But those rules don't seem to apply on social media for some reasons. There's a certain group that think that free speech means that they can say whatever they want, which has never been the case. There's other laws that are over and above what Twitter's rules of engagement are. Even if Twitter let me say whatever I wanted, if I'm living in a country that has other laws that can send me to jail for criticizing the government, then it doesn't matter whether Twitter lets me say it or not. I'm going to self-censor because I'm thinking about bigger things. And that brings us on to the question of anonymity. One of the reasons I think Twitter has been successful, this is a double-edged sword. So you've got, on the one hand, you've got anonymity brings amazing stuff. Thoughts of Dog, one of my favorite accounts on Twitter.
Yeah, I do like that account.
Thoughts of Dog, the Queen. The satirical accounts on Twitter are just fantastic. And the fact that they're anonymous and nobody knows who they are, amazing. And I think in places where criticism of the government is illegal, that is, you can go to jail for your opinions, anonymity is crucial to keep discourse open. On the other hand, bots are an issue. There must be a way that you can deal with the bots. And I think Elon is probably smart enough to be able to come up with a technical solution to this. You can build in things like rate limiting. You could say, right, if the age of the account is less than a day, limit the number of posts. Look at the number of accounts created from a certain IP address. create a set of norms the same way they do in banking that says that this is how a normal person behaves on Twitter, and this is how a normal person with 10 followers acts, and this is how a person with 500 followers acts, and this is how a person with 1 million followers acts, and you can create a pattern of behavior. And if some behavior sits outside of that, then you can create a way to say, we've got a level of confidence. We've got a 99% level of confidence that this is a bot. And therefore, we might not delete it, but we might rate limit it. We might say that it can only post a few times a day, or it can only reply to accounts in a certain way. Now, that doesn't necessarily fit with his freedom of speech jumping up and down, but he said both. He said he wants to get rid of the bots, and he says he wants freedom of speech. So I'm not sure how you square the circle on those two things.
Yeah, I'm trying to kind of align up in my head the idea of what you're talking about, like the potential direction he wants to go, and his kind of chest thumping about free speech. How does it work together?
There's not that many people who've been cancelled. And this goes back to the average user. The average user on Twitter hasn't been cancelled. There's an account, a bunch of Web3 whack jobs that tweeted Elon Musk. Tweeted Elon Musk and said, we've been censored. Their tweet was basically, we've been censored. Our tweet isn't showing up on our timeline. Yeah, we've been cancelled. But you started your tweet at Meta. So basically, from a Twitter rules point of view, it was seen as a reply, not as a tweet. If you go into the tweets and replies list, it's there. But if you go into their tweets list, it's not. Maybe Twitter's done a really bad job of educating their users on how their system works. That's not being cancelled. That's just not understanding how Twitter works.
Right.
My mind is changing on it. I have a less of a problem with Elon Musk owning Twitter outright. I'm going to wait and see. I'm not going to cancel my account just because he's bought it. Someone who has his product ability, and he's a bloody good product guy.
Yeah.
He understands how to build products that work. There isn't a decent Western super app out there, and Twitter could be that. So some people have been talking about how Twitter become more of a protocol rather than a product. So Twitter could become more like an operating system or a protocol rather than a product, and allow developers to kind of use the toolkit that is Twitter to create a whole bunch of new products and services on top of.
Which I think is interesting.
I wouldn't pay for Twitter. What about you?
No, but depending on how they develop the product and what they offered, potentially, I don't know. Who knows where it goes? So
I just don't get any value from Twitter. If it disappeared tomorrow, I wouldn't miss it. So if you go into your profile and into your settings, there is a button that you can say, request my archive. Basically, I'm going to take everything I've ever tweeted and in a zip file, and maybe I'll use that somewhere else. But if Twitter disappears tomorrow, I will not miss it. Not a bit.
But if this platform evolved and started to provide some other value,
it needs to create a lot of value, right? Because there's other platforms out there that deliver everything I can get from Twitter.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is like this whole medium has not evolved. It kind of peaked 15 years ago.
It's an elitist platform.
It is.
It's a platform for journalists and politicians.
It's a squawk box.
Yeah. And people have called it a public square, but it's a guy standing on a box.
Yeah,
in a
exactly
park,
what it is.
Yelling. In London, there's a place called Speaker's Corner, which is existed forever. That you literally stand on a fruit box and shout to whoever's walking past who wants to listen. So let's see what happens. It's a big bet.
It's a big bet, and I think there's I think the book has only begun to be written on what's going to happen with Twitter. So, like I said, I've rescinded my previous negativity about Elon Musk, and I'm going to take a wait and see, cautiously optimistic viewpoint about this, and we'll see.
We've been here before, and I'm sure he must have been around. Twitter's one of those things that if it can't be saved, it's a very binary kind of play. If he can't fix it, then it's dead. People have moved on. People are on TikTok and Snapchat and other.
Well, and I think the
platforms.
shareholders of Twitter realize that too, because all this talk of like poison pill, and we're not. Come on,
If someone's going to offer you $54, you take it because it's the best offer you're going to get.
that's right. Like we didn't talk about that in the podcast, but I'm sure you were thinking the same thing. It was like when this was all going down, I'm like, they're going to take whatever he offers because the NASDAQ is loaded with tech stocks, and they're all down 15-18%. And they're not going up.
And they're ones that have actually got profits and business models, unlike
That's
Twitter.
correct. That's right.
Anyway.
Enough on Twitter.
Yes, indeed. A big thank you to all of you who have given feedback and reviews. Your input is important to us, and it helps shape the direction of the show. So get in touch via LinkedIn, Twitter, WhatsApp, and more. The links are in the show notes. And now back to the show.
There's a news story in the New Scientist magazine about they're talking about how copper wire, telephone wire, can almost be as fast as fiber, and they can carry broadband speeds across it. I've heard this story before in like 1998 and 99. Do you remember these things? There was a story. So I worked back in the internet boom days for an incubator. Do you remember those? The incubators?
I do. They've been redefined as, what do they call them now? Venture something or other things.
Yeah, they still exist, just in different forms. There's some here. The Georgia Tech runs one too. But
Venture Lab is
Venture Labs. That's it. Yeah, you nailed it. So I worked for an incubator back in the day. It was called Verticon. They're not around, so it doesn't matter now. They're based in South Florida, and they had a couple of startups, and one of the startups that was there was associated with this company. And I can't remember the name of the company, but their idea was that they could use existing power lines, like what you plug your electricity into to send broadband.
I remember that.
You remember that? And it was going to be the next big thing. Everybody was going to have it. You could just, whatever your computer, your appliance, you just plug it into the wall, and it had broadband with it, and it was going to be the next big thing. Well, obviously that didn't happen. And I actually heard about this technology about being able to shoot broadband across copper wired existing telephone lines. And I heard that many of the phone carriers, this is back in the good old days, the Wild West of DSL carriers, that they were able to do this, and it was coming. And then I never heard anything of it. And I just thought it was funny that this story had kind of resurfaced, because I'm like, I've been hearing this bullshit. I'm like, I don't want to say it's bullshit, but I've been hearing this bullshit for, I don't know, 20 something years. I'm like, when's it going to actually happen?
Maybe one of the reasons that the electricity thing never went anywhere is who owns the wires.
Right.
If you're a phone company and you've got a massive, network of copper wires, and suddenly they become redundant because your signal's being carried by a company that has different wires that you don't own, then it's not in your interest to promote that technology or see that technology flourish, right?
Right. Well, that's true. Well, they tout one of the fastest cities in the southeast of the United States is tiny Chattanooga, Tennessee. And the internet broadband, it's all fiber, is actually provided by the electric company. It's called EPB, the Electronic Power Board.
Right.
And it's supposedly the fastest city in the South.
Right.
And I don't know how they pulled that off, but it is in fact. And I'm sure you've heard too that they're like, they're supposedly, by this time in our history, we were supposed to have broadband, super fast internet over the air. Like there would be no wires. What happened to that? What happened to flying cars too? Where are the flying cars?
You need to go to Dubai, mate. You've got them all. There's flying cars. Yeah. There's 5G.
Everything's in Dubai. How come Dubai has everything? Is that because that's where all the money is?
No, one of the reasons is because they don't have legacy systems.
Man, you nailed that one on the head. Yes. They don't have your legacy systems.
The whole country is 40 years old. So when they build a mobile phone system, they just leapfrog.
Pretty prolific statement that you just said right there, like legacy systems. Truer words were never spoken, man.
They're building suburbs as we speak, and they're just building them, It's like if you can build a suburb from scratch or a city from scratch, because they're building cities within the city. So you build a city from scratch and you say, right, what if we had unlimited budget, which they do because they've got sovereign wealth funds and whatever else, and there's no technology, there's no embedded technology that we need to worry about. So what if you had unlimited money and you were to build this from scratch using the best technology that exists today? That's why Dubai's got what it's got.
Yeah, I guess I never considered. That's amazing.
Anyway, all right, mate. This has been our Twitter episode.
Is that a wrap?
Yeah, I booked my flights to Dubai, so I'm off to the desert.
When are you leaving?
I will be there week commencing the 9th.
Are you excited?
It'll be a change of scene. It'll be interesting to see how it's changed. Like I say, the Museum of the Future is something I've got to go and photograph and see what else is on. Arabian Travel Market is on that week. And a couple of other.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah, Arabian Travel Market is like one of the biggest travel trade shows in the world.
That sounds like fun.
All right, man. I was up at 6 this morning, so this has been a long day, so I'm going to check out. So
enjoy yourself.
I will speak to you soon.
Yes, sir. I'll talk to you.